Well, purchasing land in Ghana is a long-term investment and something everyone in Ghana seems to want to do. But after you've bought the land, does that bring you peace, or is it the beginning of turmoil to brew? We're going to be joined by Mr. Kwame Jan. He's the senior lecturer at the School of Law at the University of Ghana to delve into this issue of land and its litigation matters. Good morning, Mr. Jan.
Good morning.
Good to have you here.
I'm privileged to be here.
So let's start off with this basic question of, as a buyer of a land, how do I know, or what certificate do I need to have to know that I am the only owner of that piece of land?
Good morning once again. Let me make a minor correction here.
Right.
Most of the time, you are not a buyer of land.
Okay.
You are trying to get some parcel of land to develop, maybe to build a house or make a farm. You are not buying the land.
Okay.
In about 90% of the time, you are taking a lease of land.
Right.
Now, what a lease means is that you are giving the right of access and use of land.
Okay.
And you have what we call in the law exclusive possession. It means when you are put in possession of the land, when you are given the place, the seller, so to speak, or any other person cannot come and disturb you on the land. And you are given a fixed term, normally, or you are given a term that is capable of being made definite. But the general principle is that you are given a certain number of years over which you have exclusive possession over land.
Okay.
And that is a leasehold over the land. Most of the time, it is 50 years or 75 years or 99 years. Okay. So Ghanaians normally say we have bought the land. But we in this business know that they have not bought the land. Right. They have leased the land. Now, what it means is that when the period, the term over which you have the leasehold ends, you will have to vacate or leave the land, including your property on the land. You leave it to the person who leased the land to you.
Okay.
So if you have a 50-year lease today, 50 years from now, you may have to leave the land.
Okay. So that clarity is there.
Yes.
So now in ownership of that lease, what do you need to say, I'm the only person who this land has been leased to for this number of years? Because like you rightly said, there's no buyer. Now we've all been leased, but it's not only one person who that land has been leased to. You realize 5 years down the line, it's been leased to so many other people. So who becomes the rightful owner of that lease?
And under normal circumstances, one parcel of land should not be leased to more than one person.
Okay.
And so the problem you just identified has arisen because of a multiplicity of factors. Right. In some cases, it's a genuine mistake of surveying. You survey a plan land A. Right. If there is a mistake in the surveying, land A falls in the place where land B is. Okay. So there are times where, because of genuine survey error, there are mistakes. But there are times where landowners or persons who are transferring land have done what we call multiple transactions. The same owner A, transfers the land to Mr. B, transfers the same parcel to Mr. C, transfers the same parcel to Mr. D. Now, then a matter arises, and someone makes a complaint at the police station. In the past, the police will just tell you this is a land matter, it's not a police case. Now, over the period, the police have now, through education and interactions with the police have now come to realize that when you do multiple transactions in land, it is a police case. Okay. Because if you just said it is not a police case, go and sort yourself out, then you are not going according to the law. Because there is a piece of legislation which has been on our books since 1962. It's called the Land Registry Act of 1962, Act 122. Now, according to Section 34 of Act 122, if you know that you have already transferred a piece of land, or you know that you are not the owner you don't have title to the piece of land, and you make a transaction in respect of land, it is a second-degree felony.
Okay.
So it's a serious offense which carries long prison sentence. And it's been on our books since 1962, before I was born. So when you trade in a piece of land, you cannot go back and trade in the same piece of land, because in land law, we have a Latin maxim that says, nemo dat quod non habet. That you cannot give what you don't have. Right. So after you gave the land to me, you don't have that land anymore. You can't go and give it to Dr. Ajiman. Right. But that's what we are confronting in this country. We have the law since 1962 to deal with this canker. We simply don't apply the law.
Because I was going to ask, I mean, the law has been in existence for this long, but I don't seem to have heard anyone being imprisoned for it. But again, in that scenario...
through my practice as a lawyer, 28 years, I think I've heard about one case where someone has gone to jail and been convicted for multiple transactions in land, according to Section 34. Okay,
one case.
One case I have heard.
But, you know, in the scenario you created, that's one individual doing the multiplicity. But in other cases, you've got several people claiming ownership of the same parcel of land. And in that case, it's 1:1, but it's still a multiplicity of the sale or the lease. So how do you also go about that equally?
What you mentioned is it's the result of, in some cases, what we call the mutation of the families. Okay. And it happens a lot in the areas around Accra. Right. Some of these lands belong to families. And because of greed, family members who don't have right to sell call themselves heads or chiefs. Right. So one group belonging to the same family will transfer to A. Another group belonging to the same family will transfer to B. The same person. So you could have a third and a fourth group, all members of the same family. In fact, sometimes they plan, they collude to do it. So they have a plan, an agreement that we will sell, you to go and sell. So about 4 different groups will sell, each of them will be paid. And they know that the system will not catch up with them. Right. So over time, the buyers, so to speak, get tired. And that's the end of the matter.
But anyway, let's come back because of this issue we're talking about and touch on the land tenure system in Ghana. Brief us through exactly what it means when we talk about this land tenure system. Who owns land in Ghana?
Does the
land belong to?
A land law course 1 year.
Just narrow it into a few minutes for us. Just summarize it for us.
Okay. There are different classes of land in this country. There is one set of lands we call stool lands. Okay. Now, when you say stool lands, you can also refer to those lands as skin lands. Okay. What it means is that an entity called a stool or skin, normally presided over by a chief, has control over that land. So they are the proper persons who can make allocations of that area. Okay. In some parts of the country, authority over land is vested in a clan. So clan heads have custodianship over the land on behalf of the members of their clan. So if you go to Adan, for example, there are different clans. Lomobiawe, Tepebiawe, Adibiawe, Akabiawe. All these Biawes are headed by clan heads. Okay. So these are the guys who can allocate the land, not a chief. Right. So if you go to Adan and you are looking for land to invest and you go to the chief's house for land, you won't have any land. Okay. Unless his own family land that he can recommend for you or his own clan land. Right. There are some parts of the country where the authority over land is vested in the family. Okay. So the areas around Osutrare, Osudoku, Afienya, those areas, final authority, what we call their lodia title to land, is vested in families. Okay. Now, there are some parts of the country where final authority to land is vested in persons we call Tindana. So if you go to Bolga, for example, the areas around Bolga, there are different Tindanas. There is the Tindana of Tindonsobligo, the Tindana of Soin, the Tindana of Daporitindongo. I mean, so the different Tindanas have different jurisdictional areas where they control. They are not chiefs. They are not family heads, but they are the descendants of the first settlers of that area. Now, and then there are some lands which are state lands. And these state lands are what we call the lands that have been taken over by the state through the exercise of the state's power of compulsory acquisition. Where we are right now, we are sitting on state land. It used to be Ghana land, which was taken over by the state for public purpose, which is still being used for a public purpose. Now, there are some lands called vested lands. Those lands were also taken over by the state, but they have a slightly different regime in terms of the extent of state control than the compulsorily acquired areas. So there are different strands of land across the country. Now, question is, how will you know that this land is vested land, or this land is family land, or this land? But that's why you have to come to me. I will charge you a fee. And I will tell you where you have to go.
Mr. Chan, but you can, I mean, isn't this something that by law it should be taught in schools, or we should know? Because it's part of the way we live. It's something we will eventually do.
You're a medical doctor,
I am.
Am I a medical doctor?
No, you're not.
So,
but there are a few tips I give you, like first aid,
why don't you
which you all know. I teach in schools. Everyone should know about it. So I feel land ownership, land tenure system in Ghana should be something that is taught. We should all know, at least on the first-hand basis, have a fair idea of what it means to own land or to be leased land, so that we know how we're going about it. Because many of the issues do stem from these.
It's true. If I was in charge of the educational curriculum, I would have added some basic about the law, the living law, kind of, so that you can demystify the law slightly and let the non-literates in the law also appreciate some of these things. Maybe you can look at it from social studies at SS and some small aspects about the land, how Ghana acquired its territory, Ghana, and how different parts of the land of the country are controlled by different groups. So that if you know, for example, that you are in Bolga, you don't look for a chief for land.
You go to the Tindani.
You go for a Tindana. I mean, if you are in Adan, you go to a clan head. These are basic things we can teach. But the mechanics of negotiating with the Tindana, those are
your job. Will be left in your record.
Yes.
Very well. But how does one, acquire, like I was talking about the title, the indenture, the land title? What do these things mean? And what should you have to be confident that this piece of land that has been leased to you is for you?
Now, generally, in trying to acquire land, your first step is go to the site. Normally, the vendor, the person who is trying to sell you the land, I've told you, selling and buying are not the appropriate terms, but because of the context in which we are speaking, the person who is trying to sell you the land is called the vendor. He would or she would normally get a surveyor to prepare a parcel plan for you. You are better off getting your own surveyor to verify the plan, because sometimes the size of the land, the location of the land that the vendor has given you is not necessarily consistent with the situation on the ground. So you are better off verifying the survey work that has been done. Now, when you go to the ground, ask the neighbors. The neighbors, I mean the people who have the adjoining properties. If you go and you find someone on your left side of the boundary, someone on your right side of the boundary, or some other people in the neighborhood, ask them who sold them their land. Because the general principle is that if I own this parcel, then generally I should be the owner of the parcels around it. So if Mr. A is selling you this parcel, and you ask the adjoining owner, who sold you? And he said, Mr. C. You ask the next person, who sold you? He said, Mr. C. Then be careful about your Mr. A, because there might be problems in the area. Now, if you go in to the site, someone will whisper into your ears, this land has problems, please
watch it.
So you must do a physical inspection, ask questions. Afterwards, go to the Lands Commission Because the Lands Commission is the official custodian of the public records on land.
Right.
So go to the Lands Commission and do a search, an official search.
Okay.
Now, the challenge that you have is that the official search that you are going to conduct at the Lands Commission will give you a search report.
Okay.
Unfortunately, on the fine print of the search report, it's a disclaimer by the Lands Commission. The Lands Commission says on that document that they are not responsible if you rely on the search and you do a transaction and you suffer a loss. So what you have is that, in essence, you are on your own.
But is that not ironical? Because even though they have the information, aren't they the custodians of it as it is?
Yes, it is. It is partly because, you see, the methods with which we compiled the records make the records not very sacrosanct.
Okay.
So if you don't apply the disclaimer, the Lands Commission is going to open itself to a concatenation of lawsuits.
Right. Okay. All right.
A chain of lawsuits. So the Lands Commission is also trying to cover its back.
Right. Okay.
But the Lands Commission has been going through major reforms over the last about 15 years. And the land sector itself has been going through these reforms. Now, what will happen is that at the end of these reforms, you could get a record system that are virtually foolproof.
Okay.
So the Lands Commission can stand on the records it has and say, we are giving you this information, you can rely on it.
Very well.
We will get there.
We certainly will.
Yes.
But you're walking us through the steps of the ownership.
So
Just wrap it up for us.
you go in there, you check the records at the Lands Commission. If it is consistent with what you found on the ground, then you have to deal with the person. Because the records at the Lands Commission will tell you that this land is not state land. That's the first thing it will tell you.
Right.
It will tell you that this land is not state land.
Okay.
So at least you don't have a challenge with the government. Or sometimes it will tell you the site is not affected by any recorded transactions.
Okay.
It means that that area, in their records, they have no information.
Right.
That also means you are on your own. In some cases, they will tell you that the site is affected by transaction A, which was recorded on this year, transaction B, transaction C, and the transactions will not be consistent. So at that point also, you are on your own. So generally speaking, in acquiring land in this country, you are on your own.
From beginning to end.
From beginning to end, you are on your own. And it is also consistent with the principle caveat emptor, which is let the buyer beware. In fact, it's the same when you are going to buy a car, isn't it?
It is.
So you must have your eyes wide open. And you can also protect yourself by getting professional support.
Right.
Now, in this country, we use lawyers and professionals generally by way of what I call the fire brigade approach. We wait until there is a problem.
Yeah.
You better consult the professional
Before.
ahead of making the decision so that your decision is determined or guided by professional advice.
Right.
You don't go and make the payment, and when you go to the land and their land guards, before you come and say, lawyer,
Come
I
and help
have a
me.
problem. No.
Anyway, Mr. John, I'd like to say thank you. Time hasn't been enough, but we'll certainly touch on this again. We have been talking about land litigation and disputes and what every developer and buyer or leaser, whatever you want to call it, should know. Let's see. Okay, thank you for that law lecture there. But
The land is the lessor.
and, okay, let's
The
saw
person
and
who's
let's
taking
see.
and let's see.
Very well, guys. So we'll touch on this again, talking about litigation of land and how to deal with it.